April 21st, 1918, over the Somme. Germany's most famous flying ace drops so low over enemy lines that rifles, machine guns, and the ground itself become part of the fight. For a pilot who built his reputation on discipline, patience, and choosing the moment, the scene looks wrong, almost reckless, and the question begins months earlier, with blood running down the side of his head. June 6, 1917, near Wervik in Belgium. Manfred von Richthofen, already the most feared air ace in the war, attacks a British formation and is hit in the head. The first shock is not fear, it is confusion. Blood pours into his eyes. Vision breaks apart. The sky, the horizon, the shape of the machine itself, all start to slip. He is not supposed to survive that moment, yet he does. He gets the aircraft down in friendly territory, nearly blind, badly wounded, and still alive. That fact is solid. The harder question is what came next. By the summer of 1917, Richthofen is not just another German pilot. He is a national symbol. He has become the public face of German air power, the aristocratic hunter in the red machine, the man with the score every newspaper reader knows. His victories are counted. His image is sold. His name is already larger than the cockpit. That matters because men like that are not handled like ordinary officers. They are military assets, propaganda assets, and morale assets all at once. When they go down, armies do not only lose a pilot, they lose a story. Here is where the case starts to split. The confirmed event is simple. On the 6th of July, 1917, he is badly wounded in the head while attacking British aircraft. He manages to land. He later requires treatment and a period away from operations. That part is not controversial. The contemporary observations are murkier. Later accounts describe headaches, nausea, strain after flying, and a darker mood. Some remember him as more withdrawn. Some suggest he became unusually tense. Others still saw the same focused, exacting commander as before. And this is where lazy history usually cheats. It takes a wound, adds a dramatic ending, and pretends the whole chain is obvious. It is not obvious. Before the wound, Richthofen had built his success on controlled violence, not wild aggression. He was a system pilot. He learned under Oswald Boelke, whose rules stress discipline, altitude, surprise, and refusing unnecessary risk. Richthofen hunted like a professional marksman. He did not chase every target into chaos. He preferred advantage, timing, and clean kills. That reputation is one reason the 1918 ending feels so strange. After the head wound, he tries to come back quickly. Too quickly, some later writers argue. He does return to service, but convalescent leave follows in the late summer and autumn of 1917. During that period, he also completes his memoir, Der Rote Kampfflieger, The Red Battle Flyer, a text shaped under wartime censorship and propaganda pressure, so even the man's own printed voice has to be handled carefully. The public still sees the hero. The inner picture is harder to read. Some biographers and later medical writers point to a pattern after the injury: headaches, irritability, periods of strain, and behavior that may fit lasting effects of a traumatic brain injury. A later medical article in The Lancet goes directly at the forbidden question: was the Red Baron even fit to fly after that wound? But there is a second camp, and it doesn't whisper. Critics argue that the injury theory is overused, that it turns a complicated final campaign into a tidy medical explanation, and that Richthofen remains socially functional, operationally successful, and dangerous right up to the end. This is the hinge. Not whether he was wounded, he was. Not whether he kept winning, he did. The real hinge is whether the wound changed the kind of risks he was willing to take when the margin for error was already shrinking. By late 1917 and early 1918, the air war is changing fast. Allied aircraft are improving. German strain is rising. The old freedom of the hunter is narrowing. Fame remains. Control does not. Here is the detail that changes the whole case. The title of this story cannot rest on myth alone. So, the line has to stay clean. A confirmed wound, contemporary hints of change, later interpretation, modern medical hypothesis. 4 layers, not one. Still, even with all that caution, the pattern is hard to ignore. He returns, he continues to score, he remains effective. Yet the final months carry an undertone that was not there before. Physical strain, growing pressure, and one last combat that breaks almost every instinct that made him famous. On April 20th, 1918, he claims his 80th victory. The next morning, he goes back up over the Somme. By then, the German spring offensive has turned that sector into a huge violent collision of aircraft, artillery, ground fire, and moving fronts. It is exactly the kind of sky where discipline matters most. And within hours, Germany's most disciplined ace will be dead in a field beyond the lines, after a chase so low and so exposed that the old Richthofen almost seems to vanish inside it. If you like war stories where one injury, one decision, and one fatal mistake can change everything, subscribe now, because this channel is built for exactly that kind of history. The wound explains nothing by itself, but it follows him into the last morning like a shadow that never left the cockpit. And the next part is where the shadow gets close enough to touch. April 21st, 1918, Morlancourt Ridge near the Somme in France. The last combat begins in the morning air over a front packed with movement. Richthofen is leading Jagdgeschwader 1, the famous flying circus, though the nickname belonged more to the public imagination than to any official style. By now he is not merely a squadron commander. He is a combat celebrity carrying the burden of command, expectation, and image every time he climbs into the red Fokker Doctor 1. The German spring offensive has turned the sector into a furnace. Lines have shifted, troops are exposed, aircraft from both sides crowd the sky. Visibility, speed, and split-second judgment decide everything. Canadian pilot Wilfrid May is in the air that morning, flying a Sopwith Camel. He is young, relatively inexperienced in combat, and not supposed to be hunting glory. Richthofen spots him and commits to the chase. On paper, that decision is not unusual. The unusual part is how far the chase goes. Roy Brown, another Canadian pilot, sees May in danger and dives in from above and behind, trying to pull Richthofen off. Brown's attack becomes famous almost immediately because official credit for the victory goes to him. But the full scene on the ground tells a harder story. This is where the plan stops being clean. As Richthofen pursues May, he drives lower and lower over Allied territory. That alone is extraordinary. He knows the danger. He helped embody a doctrine that warned against exactly this kind of exposure. Low altitude over enemy lines invites rifle fire, machine gun fire, terrain risk, and target fixation. It shrinks time, it steals options. Yet the pursuit continues. Later evidence strongly suggests the fatal bullet did not come from Brown's diving attack, but from the ground. The accepted modern view among many historians and medical reviewers is that a single bullet from below entered from the right side and crossed the chest, causing a wound that would have killed him quickly. The old public story made Brown the man who shot down the Red Baron. Later reconstruction made the event far less tidy. That matters, but not only because of the kill credit. It matters because it shows just how low, how long, and how deeply Richthofen stayed inside a pursuit he should have broken off. Here the disputed claim line matters again, the confirmed event. He chased an enemy aircraft low over Allied lines on April 21st, 1918, and was killed there. The contemporary observation, witnesses in the combat geometry, show conduct that looks unsound for a pilot of his experience. The later interpretation, some historians see fatigue, overconfidence, command pressure, or the simple momentum of a fast-moving fight. The modern medical hypothesis, the 1917 head wound may have affected judgment, impulse control, or fixation under stress, helping explain why he did not break away. No single layer erases the others. There are older reasons too, for why a great pilot sometimes dies in a foolish-looking moment. Habit can become rigidity. Success can become certainty. Fame can become its own prison. An ace with 80 victories may believe that one more controlled pursuit is still under control, even when it is not. But the final chase does not look controlled. It looks narrow, compressed, locked in. Now, watch the moment instinct becomes a trap. If the head wound left Richthofen more vulnerable to fixation, more willing to commit once locked on a target, then April 21st, 1918 is exactly the kind of fight that would expose it. A fast-moving pursuit. A young enemy directly ahead. A rescue attack from behind. Ground fire rising. The front beneath him. Seconds to decide whether to keep pressing or pull away. And he keeps pressing. The old master of air combat had built his legend by refusing bad odds. On this morning, he acts like a man who either does not feel the danger in time or accepts it anyway. That does not prove brain injury. It proves only the behavior. But the behavior is the reason the theory survives. The aircraft finally comes down near the Bray-Corby Road, north of Vaux-sur-Somme, in ground held by Australian forces. The landing is no graceful recovery. The triplane crashes in Allied lines. Australian troops reach it quickly. The body is identified. The legend is now a corpse in a red machine, and the image that follows is one of the strangest in the war. Enemy airmen and soldiers, recognizing what has happened, bury him with military honors. Even in death, the man remains larger than nationality for a brief moment. But burial is not explanation. The real argument starts after the funeral, because once the hero is dead, everyone gets to build the version of him they need. The invincible hunter, the doomed knight, the victim of chance, the pilot who finally slipped, or the wounded man who never fully came back from July 1917. And once medicine enters the argument, the legend becomes even more dangerous. Because now the question is no longer only who killed him. It is whether the fatal decision had started months before, inside his skull. That question does not die with him. It only gets sharper in the aftermath. The immediate aftermath creates two battles at once. One is over credit. The other is over meaning. The credit battle begins first. For years, the public story fixes on Roy Brown as the man who shot down the Red Baron. That version is simple, heroic, and easy to print. Later forensic and ballistic analysis make it much harder to keep. The wound path and the geometry of the action point strongly toward ground fire, likely from Australian positions, not the diving camel behind him. That correction matters because it strips away the neat duel ending. Richthofen does not fall in a clean night against night finish. He dies in the ugly overlap between air war and ground war, where altitude, angle, and seconds matter more than romance. Then comes the meaning battle. Why was he there in the first place? This is where the 1917 wound re-enters the case with force. In 1999, physician Henning Almers published an article in The Lancet asking whether Richthofen had really been fit to fly after his head injury. Later medical discussion, including a neurosurgical review of famous early air war head injuries, kept that possibility alive. The claim is not merely that he was wounded, it is that the wound may have left lasting effects on mood, restraint, and judgment. Some accounts support that picture. They describe headaches, nausea after flights, and a personality that seemed darker or more withdrawn than before. One line often attached to the later interpretation is that the old, sharply controlled hunter gave way to a man more brittle, more strained, maybe more aggressive. But here the brakes have to stay on. A debated medical reading is not the same thing as a proven diagnosis. The records are limited. The case is retrospective. The personality evidence is mixed and filtered through memory, grief, hero worship, and hindsight. Once a famous man dies in an apparently irrational moment, people rush to retrofit warning signs into everything that came before. Here is the part most retellings skip. Even after the wound, Richthofen remains operationally formidable. He continues to win. He reaches 80 confirmed victories. He still commands, still flies, still kills. That fact complicates every easy narrative. A ruined man does not usually keep performing at that level for months. This is exactly why the strongest version of the argument is also the narrowest one. Not that the wound turned him into a reckless fool, not that everything after July 1917 was brain damage, but that the wound may have trimmed away a margin, a small but fatal margin, in a man whose survival depended on precision, less patience, more fixation, slower disengagement, a slightly altered reading of danger. In ordinary life, maybe survivable. In low-altitude combat over enemy lines, catastrophic. Here the whole case narrows to inches. A champion pilot does not need to become wildly unstable to die from changed judgment. He only needs one decision to arrive a little late. Critics of the theory push back hard, and not without reason. One rebuttal argues that personality changes were noticed, yes, but the injury should not be exaggerated into a complete collapse of social function or flying ability. Others point to fatigue, the pressure of command, the chaos of the spring battles, and the ordinary human truth that even great pilots sometimes make one terrible choice. That is fair, but the reason the injury theory will not go away is that the last combat looks so uncharacteristic. The master of rules dies by breaking his own rules. The hunter who taught others not to chase too low dies chasing too low. The symbol of control dies in a moment that feels stripped of control. And then there is the burden of fame. By 1918, Richthofen is not only fighting enemies, he is fighting the machinery of expectation. He is Germany's ace of aces. His score is watched, his presence matters. Hero status can distort risk even without medical injury. A national symbol is always one victory away from needing another. So the cleanest reading may be the least cinematic and the most believable. Several pressures converged. Physical after effects from the head wound may have reduced his margin. Combat strain may have amplified it. Fame and command may have pushed him to keep leading from the front. The tactical situation on April 21st, 1918 did the rest. That does not kill the title. It makes it smarter. Did the head wound make him more aggressive? Possibly. That claim has support. Was it the single cause of his death? That is much harder to prove. A legend loves a single answer. History almost never gives one. Still, one last controlled question remains. If that bullet in July 1917 misses him entirely, does the final morning over the Somme still end the same way? If Richthofen is never hit in the head on July 6, 1917, the most realistic counterfactual is not immortality. It is a different breakpoint inside the final chase. The strongest argument is that the pre-wound Richthofen, trained in Boelke's discipline and famous for calculated kills, was more likely to disengage once the pursuit sank too low over enemy lines, and the tactical picture went bad. That does not mean he certainly survives April 21st, 1918. Air combat in 1918 is too chaotic for that kind of certainty, but it does mean the fatal sequence may never extend long enough for ground fire to solve it. A small change in judgment, measured in seconds, might have been enough. And in this story, seconds are everything. One reason this angle stays in the shadows is that the larger legend is louder than the subtler tragedy. People know the Red Baron, they know the red aircraft, the score, the dogfights, the funeral, the argument over who shot him down. Those pieces are clean, visual, and easy to package. A gradual change in judgment after a head wound is none of those things. Another reason is that the evidence refuses to behave. The wound is real. The personality question is partly testimonial. The medical theory is retrospective. The final combat is documented, but not in a way that gives perfect access to the pilot's mind. That makes the story strong enough to haunt, but never tidy enough to close. There is also a bigger historical bias at work. Air war legends prefer drama at the moment of death, not damage that accumulates months earlier. The duel gets attention. The headache does not. The bright red triplane gets remembered. The convalescence does not. The hero image survives because it is easier to market than a case study in traumatic brain injury under combat pressure. And then there is reputation. Admitting that Germany's greatest ace may have returned to combat with a compromised margin of judgment complicates the myth on every side. It raises uncomfortable questions about military medicine, command responsibility, propaganda pressure, and how armies use famous men until fame itself becomes a liability. This is why the story still bites, not because it proves a neat diagnosis, because it exposes how legends are built on bodies that do not always recover just because the uniform goes back on. By the end, the most honest version is also the most unsettling. The 1917 head wound did not have to transform Richthofen into another person. It only had to alter him enough that, on one crowded April morning over the Somme, the old instinct to break away arrived too late. And if that is true, then the Red Baron was not simply shot down by an enemy. He may also have been flying against an injury that the war, his fame, and his own will refused to respect. So here's the question that stays behind after the wreck is gone. On April 21st, 1918, was Manfred von Richthofen killed by a single bullet over the Somme? Or had the fatal damage already begun the day blood first ran into his eyes in July 1917?